Silver Fork, Nevada, 1880. By sunrise, Ella Moss had already lost 2 cattle, half a mile of clean water, and whatever time remained to save the ranch her family had built from stone, sweat, and 40 years of bad weather. A third cow stood trembling in the creek, its knees buckling as gray water slid around its legs. Hank Ward knelt beside the first carcass with one hand in the mud and the other nowhere near his gun. Silver-colored grit clung to his fingers. Dead minnows shone between the reeds. Across the creek, Cody Pike smiled as if he had arrived for a show. "You're too slow, old man." 2 mine hands stood behind him, far enough apart to look casual. One watched the road. The other watched Ella's barn. Hank lifted his eyes, not toward Cody, but toward the men on either side of him. "Maybe," he said, "but you brought too many witnesses for a fair fight." Ella stepped through the broken fence with a rifle held low against her skirt. She did not point it. The ranch was behind her, and every animal still standing depended on the poisoned creek at her feet. She had spent 3 nights hauling water by barrel. By noon, the last clean cistern would be empty. Cody's smile tightened. "You planning to die for her cattle?" Hank rubbed the metallic mud between his thumb and forefinger. Beneath the bank, something knocked once against stone. Hollow. Iron. Ella heard it too. Her gaze dropped to the roots beneath Hank's boots, where gray water pushed through soil that had been dry the evening before. The old gunfighter had come to Silver Fork for 1 meal and 1 night's sleep. Ella had no reason to trust him. Cody had every reason to fear him. Yet Hank was the only outsider who had seen where the hidden pipe led. And Ella was the only person standing between him and the bullet Cody had not drawn yet. The sound came again beneath the creek bank, metal against rock. Then the mud burst open. A hard stream of silver-gray water struck Hank across the hands, and the third cow collapsed before Ella could reach it. Nobody moved. From above the ridge, a mine whistle screamed. Cody looked toward the sound. For the first time, he was no longer smiling. 3 hours earlier, Hank Ward had ridden into Silver Fork with no plan beyond hot coffee, a clean stall for his gray gelding, and 1 quiet night before heading west. The town sat beneath a pale ridge scarred by mine roads and timber chutes. Stamp mills hammered above the rooftops, steady as distant artillery. Dust clung to the storefronts. A narrow creek crossed the southern edge of town and bent toward the open range. Hank noticed the dead calf before he noticed Ella Moss. The animal lay half in the water, gray foam darkening its muzzle. Ella stood knee-deep beside it, pulling at a rope looped around its chest. Her sleeves were rolled above her elbows. Mud streaked her brown work dress. She did not call for help. Hank dismounted anyway. "Take the hindquarters," she said. Together they dragged the calf onto dry ground. Ella checked its throat, eyes, gums, and swollen belly, though both already knew it was dead. "You lose many?" Hank asked. "2 since yesterday, 1 last week." She cut away the rope and moved to the water. No tears. No wasted motion. Hank crouched beside her. Silver-gray sediment gathered between the stones. Upstream, the creek ran clear. Below the bend, dead fish floated against the reeds. He followed the change in color to a bank crowded with cottonwood roots. Beneath them, something straight showed through the mud. Hank scraped away the wet soil until an iron pipe emerged, its joint wrapped in tarred cloth. Ella went still. The pipe disappeared beneath the hillside toward Rafe Sutter's stamp mill. "You knew?" Hank asked. "I suspected. Suspicion won't hold before a judge." "No," she said. "A witness might." A mine whistle sounded above them. Hank looked toward the ridge, then toward the road leading west. I had spent years learning when trouble belonged to someone else. Ella's gaze settled on the 2 worn. worn gun belts beneath his coat. "A circuit judge arrives tomorrow," she said. "I need one person who does not work for me to say what he saw." Hank covered the pipe again. "I leave at first light." Ella nodded once, as if she had expected nothing more. When they reached Moss Fork Ranch, an envelope had been nailed to the front door. Inside was Rafe Sutter's offer to buy the ranch. It expired at sundown. Ella read the offer once, then carried it inside and laid it beside the lamp. Rafe Sutter's signature sat beneath a figure barely worth half the cattle still alive on Moss Fork Ranch. The paper gave her until sundown the next day to accept. After that, the offer would vanish, along with what little patience the mine owner claimed to possess. Hank remained near the doorway. "You expected this?" he asked. "I expected pressure, not courtesy dressed like a threat." She folded the page along its original crease and placed it beneath a ledger. Then she filled 2 buckets from the kitchen cistern. The water line had fallen low enough for the dipper to scrape wood. They spent the afternoon tracing the poisoned stretch of creek. Ella drove stakes beside each dead fish bed and every place where gray residue clung to stone. Hank followed the bank toward the ridge, studying boot marks, wagon ruts, and the black tar squeezed from the pipe joints. They worked without ceremony. Ella measured distance by pacing it. Hank marked direction with small cuts in willow branches. Neither asked the other to slow down. Near dusk, hoofbeats sounded on the ranch road. Rafe Sutter arrived in a dark coat, unsuited to the heat, with Cody Pike riding half a length behind him. 2 mine hands waited farther back. Rafe looked at the stakes along the creek and smiled without warmth. "You've been busy, Mrs. Moss. My cattle have been dying." "Cattle die, not with metal in their mouths." His gaze shifted to Hank. Rafe spoke as though addressing a hired drifter. "The mine feeds this town. One ranch does not." Ella stepped between them. "I never asked you to close the mine. I asked you to stop pouring its waste through my land." Rafe removed his gloves finger by finger. "Repairing the holding pond means stopping the mill. Stopping the mill means missed shipments, unpaid wages, and families without food. Then repair what you broke before you ask me to pay for it." Cody's eyes had not left Hank's gun belts. At last, recognition sharpened his face. "I know you," he said. Hank looked at the silver-mounted pistol on Cody's hip, then at the hungry pride behind it. "No," Hank said quietly. "You know a story." Cody smiled. By the time Rafe turned his horse toward town, that smile had become a decision. Cody found Rafe outside the Silver Fork assay office after dark. The stamp mill hammered above town, shaking dust from the porch roofs. Rafe stood beneath the awning, reading freight figures by lantern light, as if the ranch below the ridge had already become another column in his ledger. "You knew who he was," Cody said. "I knew he carried guns. That was Hank Ward." Rafe folded the paper. "Should that name concern me?" Cody had spent years reading accounts of Ward's gunfights in cheap railway books. Each story described an old man who survived traps younger men never saw, until too late. To Cody, the name was not a warning. It was a door. "Give me a share in the mine," he said. "I'll make sure he never testifies." Rafe studied him. "You beat him in front of enough people. No judge will care what a dead gunfighter claimed to see." He offered his hand. Cody took it before noticing that Rafe had promised nothing in writing. The next morning, Hank rode into town to speak with Sheriff Ben Cole before the circuit judge arrived. Ella accompanied him, carrying her ranch ledger beneath one arm. The sheriff was taking statements at a rear saloon table because his office roof was being repaired. Men from the mill crowded the room before their shift, their faces gray with dust. Cody entered through the swinging doors, wearing his nickel-plated pistol. 2 mine hands followed. One drifted toward the front entrance. The other stopped near the side door beside the kitchen passage. Hank noticed both. Cody raised his voice. "Heard the famous Hank Ward came to Silver Fork to frighten working men for a widow." Conversation died. Hank kept his hands on the table. "I came to tell the truth about a pipe." Cody smiled. Stories say you were faster 20 years ago. Stories need selling. The men near the doors shifted their weight. Ella crossed toward Sheriff Cole. She placed her ledger before him, then spoke without looking at Cody. Those two aren't here to watch. The sheriff's chair scraped backward. Cody's expression changed for only a heartbeat. Then, from behind Hank, came the soft metallic click of a hammer being drawn back. Hank did not turn. "You brought 3 guns to prove you're faster than one old man," he said. The room held its breath. The hammer clicked behind Hank. Heim moved before the sound finished. His right hand swept beneath his coat, and the saloon exploded with a single shot. The bullet struck the gunman's forearm, turning the weapon aside as it fired into the ceiling. Splinters rained over the tables. Hank's own round tore through the edge of the bar and sent a shard of wood across his cheek. For 1 second, he saw nothing but blood and dust. Sheriff Cole overturned his chair and leveled his revolver at the second mine hand near the front door. "Hands where I can see them," the man abide. Cody did not. His fingers hovered above the nickel-plated pistol at his hip, trapped between the legend he wanted and the killing he had nearly begun. Hank wiped blood from his eye. "You set men at both doors," he said. "One to shoot me from behind, one to swear I drew first." The room changed around Cody. Men who had leaned forward to watch a famous gunfight now stepped away from him. The story he had prepared was dying in front of the witnesses hired to preserve it. Cody's jaw tightened. "I could still beat you, maybe," Hank said. "But now everyone knows what winning means to you." Ella stood beside Sheriff Cole, one hand resting on her closed ledger. She had seen Hank's speed. What held her attention was the fact that his pistol remained pointed at the floor. "I could have killed Cody. He chose not to." Then the saloon doors slammed open. A ranch hand stumbled inside. Smoke blackening his shirt. "Mrs. Moss," he gasped. "Your hay barn's burning." Ella was already moving. Hank followed her into the street. Above the rooftops, a column of smoke rose from the southern range, thick and dark against the morning sky. The gunfight had never been the real attack. By the time they reached Moss Fork Ranch, the barn roof had fallen in. The iron box beneath Ella's desk had been forced open. Her water records, grazing papers, and notes on the dead cattle were gone. Only Rafe's purchase offer remained. Someone had nailed it to the fence. The barn burned until the rafters folded inward. Ella worked beside the ranch hands without speaking. She hauled wet sacks to the fence line, drove cattle toward the upper pasture, and dragged unburned hay from beneath smoking boards. Ash settled in her hair and across her dress. Hank tried to lift a broken beam with his injured arm. It failed him. Ella stepped beneath the other end before he could ask. Together they moved it far enough to free 3 bales. Neither mentioned the blood running down Hank's sleeve. By midnight, the fire had become red seams beneath black timber. The clean cistern stood half empty. Beyond it, the creek carried a darker gray stain than it had that morning. Hank sat on the kitchen step while Ella washed the cut along his cheek. "This happened because they knew I was in town," he said. "It happened because Rafe believed I would sell once I was frightened enough. I gave him the crowd he needed, and I left every paper in one box." She tightened the cloth against his skin. Hank flinched, but did not pull away. "I can ride out before dawn," he said. "Cody will follow me." Ella tied the bandage and sat back. "I do not need you to draw danger away from me. You need your ranch alive. I need a witness alive." The words held between them. Hank had spent years leaving places before anyone could depend on him. He had called it caution until the name began to sound too much like cowardice. Ella opened the stolen ledger's empty drawer. "The county office can confirm the land record," she said. "Rafe did not burn the barn for that. He wants the pipe gone before the judge sees it." A cow bawled outside. They found it pushing through a damaged fence toward the irrigation pond. Ella reached the bank first and stopped so suddenly, Hank nearly struck her shoulder. The pond had turned silver gray. Fresh boot prints marked the mud beside the gate wheel. Someone had opened the channel from the creek while they fought the fire. Rafe was no longer waiting for Ella to sell. I was killing everything that made the land worth keeping. Hank looked toward the black ridge above the ranch. This time, he did not look toward the western road. By morning, Rafe had turned Silver Fork against Ella. Ikuo called the miners, teamsters, and shopkeepers to the street outside the saloon. Men arrived with lamp soot still on their faces. Women stood beneath the porch awnings, listening while Rafe spoke from the bed of a freight wagon. If the mill stops, he said, wages stop with it. He did not deny that the holding pond needed repair. He only made the truth sound smaller than the hunger that would follow. Rafe pointed toward Ella. One failing ranch cannot be allowed to starve an entire town. Ella stood beside Hank with ash still caught in the seams of her dress. My cattle drank from that creek before your mill stood on the ridge, she said. I am not asking your men to go hungry. I am asking you to stop feeding poison through my land. A few miners lowered their eyes. Others did not. Rafe produced the purchase agreement. Sign it, Mrs. Moss. Walk away with money enough to begin again. Ella took the paper, tore it once, and let both halves fall into the dust. The crowd stirred. Then Rafe looked at Hank. There is a horse saddled behind the hotel. Ride west now, and no one will stop you. For one hard moment, Hank saw the life being offered. An open road. No testimony. No young gunman waiting in a doorway. No woman depending on him to remain when leaving had always been easier. Sheriff Cole unfolded a statement on the wagon rail. If you saw the pipe, he said, put your name to it. Hank took the pencil. Cody watched from beneath the saloon awning. His silver pistol hung at his hip, but uncertainty had entered his face. Hank signed slowly. Hank Ward. The name traveled through the crowd. In whispers, Rafe's expression hardened. The offer of safe passage had expired before the pencil left the paper. Ella stepped forward and asked that the circuit judge inspect the creek at sunrise. That night, from the ranch yard, she and Hank saw 3 lanterns moving along the ridge above the hidden pipe. Then came the dull scrape of wooden crates over stone. Hank knew the sound. Blasting powder. Rafe was not preparing to deny the evidence. I was preparing to erase it. Hank and Ella left the ranch before moonrise. They did not take the road. Ella led him into an abandoned irrigation cut beneath the eastern ridge, narrow enough that their shoulders brushed the dirt walls. Above them, the stamp mill pounded through the dark, shaking dust from the roots. Halfway to the pipe, a rifle cracked from the rocks. Hank turned too late. The bullet tore across his left shoulder and spun him against the bank. He dropped to one, his right hand reaching for his revolver, before Ella caught his wrist. Not from here, she whispered. The flash came from above us. She pulled him beneath an overhang, while another shot struck the dirt where his head had been. For years, Hank had survived by choosing every escape. Now his arm hung heavy, and the darkness narrowed whenever he tried to stand. Ella cut a strip from her saddlebag lining and bound the wound tightly. I can still shoot, he said. You cannot see through stone. She took the lead. The old irrigation cut opened beneath the mill into rotting timbers, discarded ore carts, and shallow channels coated in gray slime. Ella knew which ditch once carried runoff toward the ranch. She followed its downward grade until they found the iron pipe. A raised mark on the coupling bore Rafe Sutter's mine stamp. Ella scraped mud away, exposing the joint and the stream leaking beneath it. The evidence was plain enough for any judge. Then Hank smelled sulfur. 3 powder charges had been packed beneath the retaining bank. A slow fuse ran uphill between the rocks. We cut it here, Hank said. Ella shook her head. If there is another fuse, the bank still goes. He looked at her instead of the charges. What is your plan? It was the first time he had asked, without already deciding the answer. Ella pointed toward the ranch gate wheel below. If she closed the clean water channel and opened the lower spillway, the mine waste would run as a separate stream when the judge arrived. A boot scraped above them. Cody Pike stepped onto the ridge, his nickel-plated pistol aimed down at Hank. Behind him, The end of the fuse began to glow. Cody's pistol stayed steady, but his face did not. The fuse burned behind him, hissing toward the powder beneath the bank. "Draw," he told Hank. Hank's wounded shoulder sagged beneath his coat. Blood had soaked through Ella's bandage. He could still reach his revolver, but not with the speed Cody had crossed 3 states to challenge. "You kill me here," Hank said, "and Rafe still owns the story." Cody glanced toward the ridge. Rafe stepped from behind the mill timbers with a second pistol. "Shoot him." Cody did not move. "My share," he said. "Where's the paper?" Rafe's silence answered him. Ella slipped into the drainage ditch while both men watched Hank. On her hands and knees, she followed the fuse toward the first charge. Heat watched her fingers. She buried the burning cord beneath wet mud until its red glow vanished. Then she heard another fuse. Rafe smiled. Hank saw Ella turn toward the second spark and reached for his gun. Cody fired first. The bullet struck Hank high in the side and drove him against the pipe. Hank's return shot caught Cody through the upper arm. The nickel-plated pistol fell into the gray runoff. Ella reached the ranch gate wheel below the bank. She closed the clean water channel, then kicked open the lower spillway. Clear water stopped. A separate stream of silver-gray waste poured from Rafe's stamped pipe in full view of Sheriff Cole, the circuit judge, and the townspeople arriving below. Rafe aimed at Ella. Hank fired into the timber beside him, breaking his aim long enough for Sheriff Cole to close the distance. The second charge exploded. Stone and mud struck the lower pasture. The irrigation gate vanished, and poisoned sludge rolled across the best grazing ground on Moss Fork Ranch. When the noise ended, no one cheered. Rafe lay disarmed beneath the sheriff's knee. Cody pressed his good hand to his bleeding arm. Ella found Hank beside the broken pipe. His eyes were open, but his breathing had gone shallow. The judge knelt near them, with Hank's statement still inside his coat. The creek had finally told the truth. Ella did not know whether Hank would live long enough to repeat it. 3 weeks later, clean water ran through Moss Fork Creek again. It ran slowly. The blast had destroyed the irrigation gate, buried the lower pasture beneath gray mud, and left Ella with fewer cattle than she needed for winter. The hay barn stood as a black frame against the evening sky. Rafe Sutter waited in the county jail on charges tied to the ambush, the fire, and the attempt to destroy evidence. The judge had ordered the mine's waistline closed while the water claim and damages were heard. The mill no longer ran at full strength. Some miners blamed Rafe. Others blamed Ella. No ruling could erase that bitterness. Cody Pike survived. Before the deputy took him away, Hank visited the room where the doctor had bound his arm. "You were right," Cody said. "I was faster." Hank pressed one hand to the bandage around his ribs. For one shot. He placed the nickel-plated pistol on the table, unloaded. "A name may get remembered," he said. "It does not give a man somewhere to return to." He left before Cody answered. The next morning, Hank saddled his gray gelding beside Ella's damaged fence. He told himself Silver Fork was safer without him. The old stories had found him once. They could find him again. Ella came from the house carrying no plea and no promise. She placed a hammer, a sack of nails, and a rough drawing of the new irrigation gate on the porch rail. "A decent hired hand gets meals," she said, "and a dry place to sleep." Hank looked toward the western road. A freight wagon moved along it beneath a pale cloud of dust. For most of his life, that sound had been enough to pull him onward. Behind him, Ella lifted the first gatepost into place alone. Hank removed his hat, set it on the porch, and walked back to her. They worked until sunset. Ella drove the spikes, while Hank held the timber straight. Neither spoke about how long he would stay. Across the lower pasture, the poisoned ground remained bare, a gray scar no rain had softened. Beyond it, a thin line of clean water passed through the unfinished gate. The freight wagon disappeared west. Hank heard the wheels fade. This time, the road continued without him. Thank you for staying with Hank and Ella. To the very end. Their victory did not erase every scar, but it gave them something harder to earn, a reason to stay, rebuild, and trust the future again. If this story of courage, justice, and second chances moved you, please leave a comment and tell us what moment stayed with you most. And if you enjoy heartfelt Western romance and frontier survival stories, subscribe and turn on notifications so you will not miss the next journey into the Old West.